Daf Samach Dalet Amud Aleph will begin Daf Samach Gimel Amud Beis, the first wide line. We learned previously that Rav Papa said that the lav of the Isser of a Lesishet Al Chametz Dav Zam Zivchi applies also even in a case where the one who's makdir the chelav of the Korban Pesach, even though he's not part of the Chabura, even though he's not the Sheichet, he's not the Zayrek, but even the one who is makdir the chelav of the Korban, if he has Chometz, he's also over the Isser. Tanya Gaval said to Rav Papa, we can bring a raya from the Brisa to Rav Papa. It says in the Brisa, Sheichet Esa Pesach ala Chometz, if someone checks and he has Chometz, over V'leisas. When is that so? When Chometz belongs to any one of those parties. But if it does not belong to any of those parties, it belongs to somebody else in B'Seif Ha'olam, Ein Zokak Lei. Someone who is in the other than the world, then he's not responsible for that. So it says b'ferish, so that would be a right. Or a papa, it says the sheikh, the zarek, and even the makdir, so that would be a right. But if a person does malika on the oif, on a bird, on a korban of an oif, and he does malika and he has chometz, he's not oiver. As we'll see in the Gemara shortly, that this is going according to the Rishita of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon holds that the Isser of Leisish al Chometz Dav Zivchi, it applies on Yud Daled when there's a Korban Pesach. It only applies to the Korban Pesach and not to other Korbanos. On the other times, on the Moed, where there's no Korban Pesach, so it applies to other Korbanos as well. On Yud Daled, there's a Korban Pesach. If a person brings a korban, so this is a case, for instance, where he's mechusar kippurim, he has to bring the korban. He brings it even after the Talmud Shel Bein Arbaim. Rashi says it brings on the case of an oiv because that was more common for a case of mechusar kippurim. So in such a case, there's a korban pesach. The iser of leisishchat al chametz dav sivchi does not apply to other korbanos, and therefore ein oiv b'lei klum. So that is a raya to Rav Papa. However, Rimina will ask you a stira. Another brisa says, "Asheich edes pesach al hachometz oiver b'leisas." Rav Yehuda Omer afatomin. They said also the korban tomid if it's shechted and there's chometz. Amrloi loy amrol pesach b'lvad. They chacham argue and they say no, it does not apply to the tomid. It applies only to the Korban Pesach. In Masai, when is this Isser? When does it apply? Bizman sheyesh l'sheicher al-zarek or echad mipnei chabur. It has one of those parties has the chametz, but hayal echad b'seif ha'olam ein zokak lei. Ve'echad ha'sheicher ve'azayek. Now here it says a sheichet, the zayrek, ve'echad ha'moilek. It says even the moilek. Ve'echad ha'mazah chayiv, and the mazah chayiv. So you have a stira. Here it says you chayiv even on malika. In the previous brisa it says, but the moilek ain't over b'lei klum. So it's a contradiction. The stira, the malika. And the brisa continues, avalak kaimitz is a mincha ain't over b'lei sas. If a person does kamitza on a mincha, so the kamitza is not the equivalent to shlit in this regard. He's not over. And here it says, makdir es ha'imurim ain't over b'lei sas. But here it says that if he's makdir, he's not over b'lei sas. So therefore, kasha malika, kasha aktora. We have a steer in malika, and malika, the first brisa says you're not over malika. The second brisa says you are. We have aktora. The first brisa says that by the aktora you are, but the second one says you're not. According to Tikshalach Higufa, the second brisa itself is a steer minei ubei. Diktani lo yamru ela b'pesach b'lvad. It says it only mentioned b'pesach korban pesach v'haratani echad sheich v'echad zarch v'echad melech v'echad mazah, which is clearly a korban that a malika is not the korban pesach. So does it apply only to the korban pesach or even to other korbanos? Ella, what's the pshat? How do we resolve it? Ella ha Rabbi Shimon. We're going, in all cases, we're going like Rav Shimon. Both prices like Rav Shimon. As we said, Rav Shimon holds that the Isser of Leisishchat al Chametz Dav Zivchi does apply to other korbanos during Pesach. However, when there is a korban Pesach on Yud Daled, it does not apply to other korbanos. When there's no korban Pesach, if the other korbanos are done, if you shecht it for the other korban, not for the korban Pesach, but for l'shem the other korbanos, then the issue does apply. So malika loikasha, it's not a kasha, kan ba'arbasa, kan b'chol shalmait. So when malika we say that he's potor, that's on Yudal. There's a korban Pesach, so he's not chayav for a different korban. So v'yidi Rav Shimoni, and both are going to Rav Shimon. V'haktorah k'torah nami loikasha, it's also not a kasha tanai. The ikad the makshak tor l'shchita v'ikad man deloy maksh is going according to Rav Shimon, but the question is, do we say that haktor? Do we make a hekesh between the haktor, the burning of the chalovim, to the shchita, or not? And some machlokes tanoim between the braysos. Rabbi Yehuda Imer Afa Tomid. Rabbi Yehuda says that the isra applies also with the tomid of shech der al chametz. My time of the Rabbi Yehuda. Amar lach zivchi. The pasuk says lo yisishchad al chametz dam zivchi. It says my zivchi. It doesn't say zevach. It says zivchi. My zevach. Zevach hamiyuchad li. My knee of the tomid. That's the tomid. That's the miyuchad for Kodesh Baruch Hu. That the pasuk says either because we can understand it that it's because you're makravit every day, twice a day, so it's miyuchad, or because the pasuk says korbani lachmi leishai. It says my lechem. That's what Rav Yechezkel Abramsky says. Reb Shimon, I'm Pesach Barbasa v'chula. So he says that if it's on Yud Dalet, then you're chayiv Pesach Yud Dalet, you're chayiv for the Korban Pesach. But if it's during the Mayed, you're also chayiv for other korbanos. If it's on Yud Dalet, it's only the Isra applies only for the Korban Pesach. If it's on the rest of the Mayed, it applies to other korbanos as well. My time of the Rav Shimon, where does he learn this from? Dirshu, zivche, treizim. We have two psukim that says leisishchad al chametz dam zivche. So it says zivche twice. Kori by zever zvachai. You therefore learn it. You join them together, so and you take the yud from one to apply it to the other. It'll be like it says zevach zvachai. Zevach. It says zevach and other korbanos. So therefore, we make a comparison between the two. So we say it's a zevach and it's zvachai. It applies to Korban Pesach. It applies also to other korbanos. But my hilchsa pagin rachman madari. Why did the Torah separate that way? If it applies to other korbanos as well, why does it say zivchi, and then we join it that? Why doesn't it say zvachai? Lameima, to teach you, no, it does apply only to zevach. It applies to zvachai also. They're both correct, but it also only applies to zevach, to Korban Pesach. How is that? Lameima b'zman dika zevach, when there is a Korban Pesach, lemechayv zvachai. So on Yud Dalet, there's no chiyuv for other korbanos if they have chametz. Bisman like a zevach in the mayed after Yud Dalet, where there's no Korban Pesach, mechayev zvachai. There's a chiyuv for other korbanos. Ubemayed, it says in the mayed, if you shech the korbanos, so if you shech the shame the other korbanos, then it's a kosher korban. If the person has chometz, it'll be chayv. If he shechs it for a korban Pesach, other korbanos that are shech for korban Pesach is possible. So it's not a shchita. Shchita shein ruya lo shchita. So he won't be chayev. He won't be chayev for having chometz because it's not. There's no issur lo yisishchad al chometz dam zivchi because it's a possible shchita. It's not considered a shchita. So zokting more time the shaloi lishma. So it says when he shechs the korban in the Korban Pesach, if it's a Korban Pesach on the Mayid, if he shechs a Korban Pesach shaloi lishma, not for a Pesach, then he's chayev because it's not a Korban Pesach. He's shechting it for not for a Korban Pesach, and now it's therefore kosher for a shlomim. So hastama, but it's mashma that it's dafka that if he did it's explicitly shaloi lishma. But if you just shechted it stam without any particular kavana, then we say it's mashma that it be potter. Amai, why should that be so? Pesach b'shar yimei sashana shlomim hava. The status of a Pesach after Yudalin is the status of a Shlomim. So why does he explicitly have to shech it not for a Korban Pesach, just shech it stam, without any particular kavanah? Even if he shech it without any particular kavanah, its status is a Shlomim, and therefore it should be as if he shechted a Korban Shlomim with having chametz, and it should be chayim. So Shmami Noah, should we learn out from here that Pesach b'Yomi Masechet Pesachim? Should we learn out from here that even though we say Pesach b'Yomi Masechet is considered a Shlomim, but perhaps we should derive from here, but that's only if he's oiker the Pesach, only if he takes it out of the status of Pesach. He says this should not be a Pesach, it should be a Shlomim. But perhaps we'll learn out from here that min hastam, it's not a Shlomim. You have to take it out and be oiker it from a Pesach. The Gemara says, no, Amar Rabbi Chia bar Gamdan, this is going to be a Chabura, the Talmid Chachamim, it came out from their group of Talmid Chacham, they said, Kikoin Shayu Bam Tamei Meis. No, maybe I'll tell you really that a Pesach, after a Korban Pesach, after the Pesach, it automatically has a status of Shlom. You don't have to do an Akira, it's automatically considered a Shlom. You don't need an Akira. Why over here do you need an Akira? Because we're talking in a specific case that the Baalim were a Tmei Meis. At the time of Pesach Rishon, they were Tmei Meis. They couldn't do the Korban Pesach. So in such a case, v'nidachim v'nidcham Pesach Sheni, and therefore they're pushed off the Pesach Sheni. So therefore, in this case, the Korban Pesach min hastam would be used for the Pesach Sheni. So in this case, where the owner still has to be Mekayim and can be Mekayim his Chiv of the Korban Pesach, then it does not automatically have a din of Shlomim. So over here you need an Akir. The Stam L'Shum Pesach Kohen. So Davka, in this case, you need an Akir. But otherwise, we would say you don't need an Akir. Zok the Mishnah, HaPesach Nishchat B'Sholosh Kitos. The Korban Pesach was shechted in 3 groups. They had 3 different groups and 3 different time frames that people came together, Klal Yisrael came together to do Shech the Korban Pesach on Yudalad Ben Arabayim. Shenemar, why do we know that it has to be divided in 3 groups? Meaning it's not only a practical consideration that there were so many people that they had to divide in 3 groups. It's a halacha that it has to be in 3 groups. Shenemar, the pasuk says, V'shachtu oisa. It says, V'shachtu oisa kol kahal adas Yisrael. So there are 3 different groups that are mentioned over here. The kahal adas Yisrael. So therefore, it has to be done in 3 groups. The first group came in, so they filled up the Azara with people. They filled it in and packed it in, and it became full. Then Nalu Daltas Azara. Then they closed the gates of the Azara, and now they were ready to be makriv. The first group was ready to be makriv the Korban Pesach. Taku Variya Taku. And they did a blua at Tkiyah, like we do on Korbanos, when Korbanos Sibor, and they have Tkiyah, the Korban Pesach, as we'll see as we go through the Masechet, the Korban Pesach has characteristics both of a Korban Yochid and a Korban Sibor. So they blew the shofar, and then HaKahanim on Meshur Shurs. They had rows of Kahanim. They had rows of Kahanim stretched from a line from the Zbeach to the end of the Azor. And they had in their hands bowls of gold and silver. So they didn't mix the lines. They didn't have some Kahanim with gold and some with silver. They had one line with gold. The entire line, the Kahanim had bowls of gold. The other line, completely silver, totally of silver. So Shur Shakula Kesev, Kesev, Shur Shakula Zav, Zav, Loy Hayamur, they didn't mix it together. Veloy Haya Labzichin Shulaim. The bowls didn't have wide bases, they had narrow bases, because if they had a wide base, if the Kohen got preoccupied and didn't do the Sarika right away and put it down on the floor, the gum could get coagulated. Therefore, it did not have a wide base, so it could not be put down on the floor, and he would be holding it and do the Zrika before the dam would coagulate. So they didn't do it, because otherwise we'd afraid they'd put it down and the blood would congeal. Shalchad Yisrael, the Yisrael shechted the Korban Pesach, The Mishnah says Shachar Yisrael. Shchita is one of the avodah that's kosher b'zar, even though it's an avodah. Shchita is kosher with a zar. Yisrael can do the shchita. They can't do the other avodas. It has to be done by a kohen, but shchita is kosher b'zar. There's some discussion is when it says Shachar Yisrael, why does it mention Yisrael? Certainly a kohen can do the shchita. So one approach is just to teach us this halacha that the shchita is kosher b'zar. But Yeshua said the mashmos is that the bailim, it's a mitzvah to Yisrael. The bailim, it's a mitzvah for the bailim to do it. So if the bailim is Yisrael, it's a mitzvah that he should do it. So Shachar Yisrael v'kiva l'kayin, the kayin does the kabbalah. Then they pass the blood, they pass it forward to the mizbeach. Naisel l'chaver v'chaver l'chaver. They would pass it from one to the other until they got to the mizbeach. U'mekabel samale u'machzer es hareka. And the kayin who did the zrika, then he would accept the full bowl, meaning the bowls were passed on an assembly line. They're passed from one to another, so to speak, and each kohen would receive a full bowl and pass it forward. The empty ones were passed down. So makabel samal machzes reikon, kohen akarveisel mizbeach, and the kohen that was next to the mizbeach, zorkan zrika achav keneged yisoid, he does the zrika, and he does the zrika that keneged yisoid opposite the base, meaning on the side of the mizbeach, where there was the base of it, where there was yisoid above that, that's where he did the zrika. So they did the avodah for the Korban Pesach. That was the first group. Yotze kas rishona v'nichsa kas shniya. The first group they completed their avodah of the Korban Pesach. They left the Azorah. The second group came in, and again they repeated that. They did the procedure and they did the avodah of their Korban Pesach. Yotze shniya v'nichsa shlishis, and then they left, and then the third group came in. Kach Maisa Hashniya Vashlishis, the second and third group, the procedure was the same. Korvas HaHallel, they recited the Hallel. There's a Machlekes Rashi and Taisus. Who recite? Rashi says the Yisraelim, and the Taisus says the Leviim did it. Im Gom Rishonim. If they finished the Hallel and they did not yet finish the Avodah of the Korban Pesach, they repeated the Hallel. Vim Shonu Shilshu. And if they completed it a second time, and they still didn't complete the avodah of the Korban Pesach, they recited a third time. But it never happened that they said they recited the Hallel a third time. It never happened. The Kohanim were zrizim, and they did the work diligently, and therefore it was all completed, and they never had a time to do it, to recite it a third time. Rabbi Yehuda never happened that on the third group that lo higio levahavta ki yishma. They never even got by the third group to the section of ahavti ki yishma mipnei shama mu'atim, because by the time they came to the third group there was very few people. Meaning the people were zrizim. They came to the first group, the second group. By the third group there weren't that many people, so the Kohanim were able to complete the avodah very quickly. They didn't even get to that portion of the Hallel. Generally speaking, the way they did it on a weekday, so too, the same thing if your dalit of Nisan, of Erev Pesach, fell out on Shabbos, when they had to do the avodah on Shabbos, generally speaking, it was the same thing. They did it in the same way. The avodah of the Shchita, Zrika of the Korban Pesach was Doich Shabbos, so generally it was done in the same way. Except that the Kohanim would wash the floors of the Azorah against the will of the Chachamim. We'll see in the Gemara what the dispute is over here. But what they used to do is, there was a canal running through the Azorah with water. They stopped up the canal, the water overflowed, it washed the floors, and then they opened it up, and then it drained out, and all the blood and refuse drained out. The floor of the Zorah and Erev Pesach, because of the enormous amount of korbanos that they were shechted and mimakriv, it was filled with blood. So that's why the Kohanim did that, but that was shaloi b'tzayin chachamim. Rabbi Yehuda, he says, he said before they did that, they used to take a kais, there was so much blood on the floor, they took the akais filled with blood, which had a tarum, is a mixture of blood from many korbanos, and zarka zrika achas lagam mizbeach. They threw it one zrik on the mizbeach. The Chum disagreed with this practice. Again, we'll see in the Gemara what the issue is over here. Now they had to skin the animals. After they did the avodah, they had to skin it. So they used to suspend it from hooks and then strip the skin. They had iron hooks that were in the walls and the pillars where they had the basement behind the butchering place. They suspended the animals and they removed the skin. Now, someone didn't have a pillar to suspend the animal on the hook. There was no room to do it. What did he do? There were smooth, thin sticks, and he put it on his shoulder, on his friend's shoulder, and that's the way he used it to be able to and he suspended the Pesach, and that's how he used to skin it. So if he didn't have the hook, they did a makeshift kind of procedure where they had these sticks, they put it on his shoulder, his friend's shoulder, they suspended the animal, and they skinned it. Rabbi Lezer Aimer, our boss, he says the 14th of Nisan, they won't even use the sticks. He just put his arm, and used his arm as the stick. And his friend's hand on his shoulder, and they suspended it and they skinned it in that way, because Rashi says that they couldn't prepare the sticks on Shabbos, and Rashi in Sukkah says, and Shabbos rather says, because it's muksa, so they could not use the sticks because it was Shabbos. They used their arms. What happened next? They tore it open and they removed the emurim that had to be burnt on the mizbeach. You put them in a bowl, and they burnt it on the mizbeach. So the first group left, and they went to the Harabayis to stay there. On Shabbos, the avodah of the Korban Pesach is Dovid Shabbos, but not the roasting of it. The roasting of it is considered for the purpose of a yachid. It's not the Shabbos, so they have to wait till the nighttime, till Motzei Shabbos, in order to roast the meat. So the first group went out and they went to the Harabayis. Shniya b'chil. The second group went to the area which is the chil, which is at the end portion of the Ezra's Noshim. That's where they went. V'ashlish is b'mekayim menas. And the third group, they stood in their place. They just stayed where they were, and they waited until after Shabbos. The Rabbi Kiva Eger's Medayik, it says, it stood because they were in the Azora. You're not allowed to sit in the Azora. Only a king, a Malcha Beis Dovid, is allowed to sit. So therefore, it's Medayik. They had to stand, meaning they had to stand until Motzei Shabbos. Chashecha became dark, Yotzev with Solas Pischayim. They went out and they roasted their Korban Pesach.